In New York, a young Marine vanished without warning from his military base. The officials gave no answers, only indifference, shrugging it off as another soldier who disappeared during off-duty hours. They closed the case, locked it in a drawer, and moved on. But fate didn't forget. 8 years later, during routine renovations at the old military housing, workers stumbled upon a clue buried deep in the walls of that same base, and within a dusty air conditioning unit in the room where the Marine once lived, was something that would finally pierce through the silence, exposing a truth darker than anyone could imagine. At Westfield General Hospital, the emergency room's lights flickered above the exhausted figure of Sarah Dalton. She peeled off her gloves, latex stretched thin by 10 relentless hours, 3 cardiac arrests, 1 motorbike collision, and a dozen smaller traumas had passed through her hands. At 47, her body knew when it had hit the wall. Today was that day. As she stepped through the hospital's sliding doors, the late October chill cut through her scrubs like a knife, reminding her that her shift might be over, but the weight she carried never really left. Her nursing shoes tapped softly across the asphalt as she walked to her car. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out her phone with fingers still sore from compression chest pumps. The screen blinked with several missed calls, all from one number. Her breath caught. Detective Luis Moreno. 3 calls in 30 minutes. Her heart stuttered. For 8 long years, since her son Evan vanished, Moreno had remained her only ally in law enforcement. But he'd never called like this, never this urgently. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her Honda Civic and dropped into the seat. With a trembling thumb, she hit call back. "Detective Moreno?" she said as the line picked up. "It's Sarah Dalton. I'm so sorry. I was mid-shift, just getting out. Is everything okay?" There was a pause. "Mrs. Dalton, don't apologize. I assumed you were working. I tried reaching you earlier." His voice was careful, measured. She recognized the tone. It was how doctors spoke before telling families the worst. "It's not quite an emergency," he said. "But we found something. It might be a new lead in Evan's case." Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her pulse surging. "What did you find?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I can't go into detail over the phone. It's personal. We need you to come to the base, Camp Buckner, where Evan was stationed." The name brought a sting to her chest. Camp Buckner, the place where everything began and ended. "That's a 2-hour drive," she said, glancing at the dimming sky. Fatigue weighed on her, but the thought of her son banished it. "Would you like an escort?" Moreno asked. She didn't hesitate. "Yes, please. It's been a long day. We'll be there in 15 minutes." The drive home blurred past. Her mind spun with questions that had no shape, only fear. What could they possibly have found after so long? 8 years ago, the Marine Corps had been cold and dismissive. They claimed Evan had gone missing during Liberty hours off duty and thus outside their concern. They made a show of looking, then quietly moved on. She hardly remembered changing out of her scrubs. Jeans, sweater, purse slung over one shoulder. She stood by the front window, heart in her throat, as the unmarked car pulled into the driveway. Detective Moreno stepped out, a little grayer, a little heavier. His partner, Officer Hans Vansberg, remained behind the wheel. "Mrs. Dalton," Moreno said gently as she locked the front door behind her, "thank you for agreeing to come on such short notice." "Of course," she replied, slipping into the back seat. "You said you found something?" Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the calm mask she wore. "We'll explain everything at the site," Moreno replied, trading a glance with Vansberg. The car pulled away from Westfield, leaving behind street lights and noise. They filled the time with idle talk about fall colors and flu season, anything but Evan. Sarah stared out the window, watching suburbia give way to empty fields and rust-colored woods. Each mile felt like a year lost, Her hands curled into fists. What were they about to show her? By the time they reached Camp Buckner, the wind had risen, whipping through the forest that bordered the base. The barracks stood as she remembered, unyielding brick, razor wire fences, and that sterile military precision that always felt oddly impermanent. A young Marine stood at the gate. "Ma'am," he said crisply, saluting. "Corporal Avery James. I'll be escorting you." They walked in silence through the compound. Their footsteps echoed off stone corridors and polished concrete. The building they entered was one of the older dormitories, stale with the scent of industrial cleaner. Most rooms were quiet. Dinner or drills must have emptied the halls. Corporal James stopped at a door marked Unit 12B. "Private Dalton's old room," he said, unlocking it. Inside, the space was stark. 4 beds with tight corners, 4 lockers, 1 shared desk. Sarah's eyes were immediately drawn to the window unit. Old-fashioned, manual controls. Its wide vents were surrounded by yellow evidence markers. "Ma'am," the corporal began, his tone now stiff with formality, "we're renovating this wing. During replacement of this unit, workers discovered items hidden inside." Detective Moreno stepped forward. "They found magazines," he said slowly. Sarah blinked. "Magazines?" "Yes, adult magazines," Moreno clarified. She frowned. "What does this have to do with Evan?" Corporal James shifted uncomfortably. "They were gay adult magazines, ma'am, and we found personal items inside the same compartment." Her breath caught. That's that's not possible. Evan wasn't gay. He had girlfriends in high school." "Mrs. Dalton," Moreno said softly, "we also found his cross pendant, the one you reported missing, and a pen with his name engraved. These items were wrapped with the magazines." Sarah's knees buckled slightly. She sat on the nearest bed, Evan's bed, directly beside the AC unit. "Can I see them?" "Are you sure?" Moreno asked gently. "I need to?" she whispered.Onsberg handed her the evidence bag. Her hands shook as she opened it. The magazines were faded but intact. She flipped through them slowly, breath catching as she reached the margins. Handwritten notes, tiny drawings, doodles. It was Evan's handwriting. She knew it like her own. Her throat tightened. Birthday cards, report cards, letters from summer camp. It was him. The pendant. The pen. His words. All hidden where no one would think to look. She whispered. He didn't want them to find it. She closed her eyes, heart splintering. The pieces of Evan's truth slid into place. How he'd always preferred the company of girls. How he always deflected when she brought up relationships. How he'd sometimes seemed to protest too much when insisting he was straight. "He lied to me," she whispered. "Every time I asked, he said no. He wasn't gay." And yet, the truth sat heavy in her lap. As a nurse, she had seen so many stories, heard so many confessions. She believed herself to be open-minded, but now, facing this truth about her own son, her heart fractured with sadness. Sadness that he hadn't trusted her, hadn't felt safe enough to tell her. The door opened. A man in a captain's uniform stepped inside. "Apologies for the delay," he said, offering a firm handshake. "Captain Charles Vale. I was Evan's commanding officer 8 years ago." He looked every inch the soldier, salt and pepper hair, rigid bearing, and eyes dulled with things he'd never unsee. "Mrs. Dalton," he said solemnly, "I want to say how deeply sorry I am. The Corps did all we could within protocol. But Evan left during Liberty. That limited our reach." He let the words trail off, truth wrapped in bureaucracy. "Of this discovery, we hope to reopen certain avenues," Moreno added. "We'll be collecting the evidence and re-interviewing his former roommates." Sarah sat frozen, the storm of grief, revelation, and long-buried truth closing in. What had Evan been running from? And more painfully, what had he been hiding from her? 8 years had passed, yet with this new discovery, the fog around Evan's disappearance began to thin. "We should also talk to other Marines who were close to Evan," Detective Moreno said, locking eyes with Captain Vale. "Anyone who might have known this part of him." The captain hesitated. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, the storm creeping closer. He and Corporal James exchanged glances, their silence confirming the weight of the situation. "Gentlemen," Captain Vale finally said, "I'm afraid those interviews will have to wait until morning. A severe storm is sweeping through the Hudson Valley tonight. Roads up here can turn dangerous fast. We often get closures when the wind gets strong." Almost on cue, a bolt of lightning flashed across the window, casting eerie shadows on the barracks walls. "For everyone's safety," Vale continued, "it would be best for you to stay overnight. We'll reconvene at 1000 hours and conduct the interviews then." He turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Dalton, we have guest quarters available for you on the 3rd floor, in the female wing. Private room, private bath. I assure you, it's comfortable enough." Sarah looked to Moreno, silently asking whether this felt right. He gave a small, reassuring nod. "Probably for the best," he murmured. "A fresh start in the morning might bring clarity." "There's a canteen open until 2100 hours, Corporal James added, "and the infirmary is right down the hall from your room if you need anything." A young female Marine appeared at the door, as if on cue. "Private First Class Martinez." She introduced herself with crisp precision. "I'll escort you, ma'am." Sarah stood slowly, her limbs weighed down by fatigue and emotion. Captain Vale turned back to the group. "Let's meet in the main hall at 1000 hours tomorrow. And Mrs. Dalton, feel free to walk the grounds. Sometimes seeing where your son lived, the routines he followed, it can bring a kind of peace, even clarity." She nodded silently, still digesting what she had learned, and followed Martinez out. As she turned back one last time, her eyes locked on the air conditioning unit, where her son's truth had been sealed away for nearly a decade. It sat quietly now, a silent witness to secrets that had nearly vanished with him. The guest quarters were tidy but bare, a single bed made with military precision, a small desk, and a bathroom tucked behind a folding door. Everything was sterile, functional, designed for necessity, not comfort. Martinez pointed out the canteen's location and the infirmary. "Duty officer is on call all night if you need anything," she said before gently closing the door behind her. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. Her body, numb from the weight of the day, finally sagged. Every cell in her body ached. The shift, the drive, the emotional gut punch that had started in a dusty barracks room and hadn't let up since. She considered calling her sister, reaching for the phone, but stopped. What would she even say? That Evan had been gay? That he'd kept it hidden? That the discovery, though painful, explained so many quiet mysteries, yet left an even bigger void where the truth should be? Outside, the storm arrived with full fury. Rain slammed against the windows. The wind howled like a living thing. The barracks groaned in the darkness. Sarah crawled into bed, curling beneath the coarse blanket. And as the storm raged outside, her mind wandered, not to Evan the Marine, but to Evan the boy. The boy who had dug in her garden, who'd sat at her bedside when she had the flu, who had always seemed to carry a quiet weight in his chest. Had the military discovered his secret? Had someone threatened him? Or had the pressure of hiding who he was slowly broken him? "Tomorrow," she told herself, "tomorrow, I'll ask everything." Despite the noise, sleep crept in fast. Not restful, not peaceful, but deep enough to silence the storm outside and the one brewing within. Sarah's eyes opened at 5:30 sharp, her internal clock seemingly rewritten overnight by the military precision surrounding her. She lay still for a moment, the sterile walls around her unfamiliar. Then everything came rushing back. The unit, the magazines, Evan's handwriting. She sat up fast, her nurse's discipline activating like second nature. In the small bathroom, she splashed cold water on her face and pulled her brown-gray hair back into a tight ponytail. She dressed in the same jeans and sweater from yesterday and stepped into the hallway. Activity was already buzzing. Young female Marines walked past in pairs, some nodding politely, others lost in their own routines. Sarah offered quiet smiles, wondering with every face, "Had you known my son? Had you noticed when he stopped coming to formation?" As she descended the stairs, her civilian shoes whispered where combat boots thundered. In the male quarters below, the energy shifted, louder, more chaotic. She glimpsed open doorways and rows of beds, young men shirtless and joking, beds with sharp corners and boots lined up like soldiers themselves. "Johnson, that's the worst rack I've ever seen. My grandma could bounce a quarter higher than that." "Yeah, well, your grandma was a Marine, Thompson." Laughter echoed down the corridor. Sarah felt a strange ache. Had Evan laughed like that? Had he traded jokes? Or had he lingered at the edges, smiling but never invited fully in? Outside, the parade ground buzzed with synchronized motion. Marines barked cadence, breath visible in the frosty morning air. Sarah stood for a long moment, watching their movements. The discipline, the brotherhood, the raw pressure to conform. Evan had come here to prove something. To her, to himself, to a world that measured men in grit and muscle. But Evan had always been different. He had hands that healed, nursing injured birds, reading to children, comforting the sick. Had anyone seen that version of him here? Had someone loved him for it? The questions swirled again. The need for answers surged. She turned back toward the building, driven by something deeper than curiosity, mother's intuition. She made her way upstairs toward the administrative offices. A female sergeant with sharp posture entered the corridor. "Excuse me, Sergeant," Sarah called. The woman turned, expression unreadable. "Yes, ma'am?" "I'm Sarah Dalton. I'm here about my son, Private Evan Dalton. I was hoping to speak with Captain Vale before the interviews begin." Recognition flickered. "Of course, ma'am. Captain Vale's office is third door on the right. Not sure if he's in yet." "Thank you," Sarah said, already walking. The hallway here was softer, carpeted, lined with Marine Corps memorabilia, faces in black and white photographs watching her pass. She stopped at a door labeled Captain Charles Vale, commanding officer, and knocked gently. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. She leaned in. Voices, muffled, coming from what must be a private bathroom attached to the office. She hesitated, then something caught her attention. "Push harder, it's not going in." Grunts, awkward sounds. The shower was running. Her heart skipped. The words, the noises, weren't just unusual. They were unmistakably intimate, sexual. She froze. Her mind reeled. Captain Vale? The implications struck her hard, especially after what she'd learned about Evan. She turned to leave, but in her rush her purse clipped a coat stand. It crashed to the floor. The shower stopped. A voice called out, sharp and alert. "Who's there?" Sarah froze in place. And in that instant, everything changed. Sarah didn't wait to respond. Her instincts, sharpened by years in the ER, took over. She pulled the office door closed with a steady hand and slipped down the hallway, trying to appear calm, even as her pulse pounded in her ears. She forced herself to walk briskly but not too fast, feigning purpose while her mind raced through a storm of questions. What exactly had she walked in on? Captain Vale, so polished, so composed the night before, had sounded unmistakably involved in an intimate moment, and the idea of it happening inside his office, with the water running and those strange noises echoing from behind the door, Sarah couldn't shake the unease creeping up her spine. And yet, she questioned herself. Was she letting her emotions cloud her judgment? Last night's revelations about Evan had shaken her. Learning that her son had lived with a hidden truth, one he'd felt too ashamed or too unsafe to share, was enough to make any mother doubt the world around her. Was she projecting her pain? Her grief? She'd just begun to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, she was overreacting when she heard the door open behind her. "Mrs. Dalton?" The captain's voice was calm, measured, polished to military perfection. She froze. Turning slowly, her cheeks burned with a shame she hadn't expected. Captain Vale stood tall in his crisp uniform, not a crease out of place. His expression wasn't angry. If anything, it was almost amused. "I believe you were looking for me," he said, stepping aside to welcome her back. She hesitated, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "Captain, I'm terribly sorry. I shouldn't have." "Please, come in," he said, his voice gentle, composed. She stepped inside, heart still pounding. The office was well lit now. Sunlight streamed in through open blinds. A tidy desk sat near the window, its surface meticulously organized. Photos lined the walls. Marine ceremonies, plaques, flags. Everything was so normal, so official, except for the young Marine standing awkwardly by the bathroom door. "Mrs. Dalton, this is Private Caleb Ross," the captain said evenly. "Private Ross, this is Mrs. Dalton. Private Evan Dalton's mother. She's here to assist with follow-up on the case." The young man nodded, his face tight, his voice barely a whisper. "Ma'am." He looked to be about Evan's age at the time he vanished. Same slender build, same youthfulness in the face that made him look barely old enough to shave, let alone wear the uniform of a Marine. "Private Ross was assisting me with a clogged drain in the bathroom," the captain said casually, even as he closed the door. "These old buildings, plumbing's a nightmare." Ross nodded stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah tried to force a smile, but something was off. The private's stance looked too rigid, not like parade rest, but like tension disguised as discipline. His eyes flicked between the captain and the exit, quick, nervous glances that sent up alarms in her gut. "I'm afraid the scene may have sounded questionable," Vale continued, flashing a disarming smile. "We were testing the drain, pushing the snake through. My phrasing might have been a little unintentional." He chuckled lightly. "These old barracks don't make it easy. We have to get creative sometimes." Sarah tried to relax. "Of course. Plumbing." Grunting. "Testing the water." It was all explainable. Her face flushed with embarrassment. I understand. I knocked a few times, and when I didn't hear a response, I thought, I just wanted to check. I shouldn't have opened the door." "No harm done," the captain replied. But her eyes remained locked on Private Ross. He stood, still as stone, hands behind his back. But it wasn't natural. It was rigid, controlled. She saw something flicker in his eyes, a flash of something unspoken. Was it fear, shame, or something else entirely? Captain Vale turned slightly. "Private Ross, you're dismissed. Thank you again." "Yes, sir," Ross said quickly. He turned to go, but before stepping out he looked back at Sarah. Their eyes met for a single second, and in that look she felt something powerful. A warning. A silent cry. Then he was gone. Captain Vale moved behind his desk. "Now then, Mrs. Dalton," he said smoothly. "I imagine you didn't come here to discuss plumbing." Sarah sank into the chair he gestured toward. Her mind was still spinning, but she forced herself to focus. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I wanted to speak to you before the formal interviews." "About Evan." The captain nodded. "Understandable. I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about what we found, about what it might mean." "Was there anyone here Evan was close to? Anyone who might have known more than they let on?" Vale leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. "Your son was different," he said, almost reflectively. "Not in a bad way. He was quiet, kind, thoughtful. That stands out around here." "Was he bullied?" Sarah asked sharply. Vale's expression grew careful. "Not exactly, but the Marine Corps tends to attract a certain archetype. Assertive, dominant. Your son didn't quite fit the mold." "Gentleness isn't weakness," Sarah said, a little too quickly. "I agree," Vale said, nodding. "But not all do. Some saw his demeanor as soft. He kept to himself, didn't form many strong bonds." She pressed. "Did you ever notice him with anyone in particular? Anyone he might have confided in?" Vale hesitated for a beat. "I make it a point not to pry into the personal lives of my men. What they do off-duty is their business, so long as it doesn't affect discipline." "Diplomatic, too diplomatic." "There must be signs," she pushed, her voice firmer now. "You must have noticed something." "I noticed he was often alone," the captain said finally. "Sometimes looked burdened. But that's not uncommon. Many young Marines struggle with homesickness, with the culture shock." Sarah studied his face. His answers were measured, practiced. She'd spent enough time around trauma patients to recognize when someone was withholding something. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you, Captain. And again, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding earlier." "No apology needed," he replied, standing to walk her to the door. "Why don't you grab some breakfast in the canteen? The view of the training field might help you picture Evan's life here." She nodded, murmured thanks, and stepped into the corridor. But as she walked away, the captain's last words clung to her like a cold mist. "Try not to overthink it," he had said. "Sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one." Sarah's instincts flared again. No, nothing about Evan's disappearance was simple. The morning sun poured through the windows now, flooding the halls of Camp Buckner with golden light, but Sarah felt no warmth. Private Ross's haunted expression stayed with her. What had he wanted her to see? And why did it feel like Evan had worn that same look all those years ago? At the canteen, the clatter of trays and the smell of hot food brought her briefly back to earth. Long benches stretched across the utilitarian space. Young Marines lined up for breakfast. Eggs, bacon, strong black coffee. At a window-side table, Officer Vansberg sat alone. He looked up and smiled as she approached. "Morning, Mrs. Dalton," he said, scooting his tray to make room. "Sleep okay?" Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee. Her hands still trembled slightly. "No," she said quietly. "Not really." And as she sat beside the only ally she felt she had left, the puzzle of her son's life grew even more tangled. "As well as could be expected," Sarah replied, her voice tight as she wrapped her fingers around the coffee mug, letting the warmth bleed into her trembling hands. The room smelled of bacon and bleach, a strange but oddly grounding mix. She glanced at Hans, who had just set down his fork. "Have you seen Detective Moreno?" she asked quietly. "In the lock-offs." "He's sitting up with base security, getting the interview room ready," Hans said, wiping his mouth. "We're hoping to get through everything before 1300 hours. Weather's clearing up, so we should be able to head back to Westfield by this afternoon." Sarah stared into her coffee. watching the way the dark liquid rippled with each subtle motion of her hand. "What if we don't find anything useful?" she murmured. "The magazines, they tell me something about Evan that I didn't know, but they don't explain why he disappeared. They don't tell me why he left or what he was running from." Hans leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You asked the captain about bullying, right?" "He was evasive," she said. "Polite, diplomatic, but evasive. And I can't stop thinking, was Evan targeted? Did someone suspect? Was there a relationship that soured? Jealousy? Hans nodded slowly. "In my experience," he said, "no matter how private or quiet someone is, there's always one person who knows. Someone sees the cracks, hears the whispers. We just have to find that person." Sarah offered a faint smile. "I hope you're right. I just want closure. Even if he ran away, even if he had to leave everything behind to live freely somewhere else, I just need to know he's alive." As she spoke, she felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She looked up. Private Ross. He was sitting with a group of young Marines across the room, but his eyes were locked on her. When she met his gaze, he jerked away quickly, eyes dropping to his untouched tray as if it were suddenly fascinating. She considered telling Hans about the morning's encounter, but what would she say? That she overheard something strange? That a young Marine looked shaken in a perfectly innocent situation? No, not yet. Not without more. She tried to focus on her coffee again, but the weight of Ross's stare returned. When she looked up this time, he was already standing, his tray swiftly abandoned. He moved toward the exit with purpose. Too much purpose. Sarah followed his movement through the window. He made for the training field, but something changed the moment he saw Captain Vale in the corridor. Ross tensed, shoulders squaring unnaturally, his steps faltering. In a flash, Ross veered off course and disappeared back into the building, heading for the staircase that led down to the male barracks. His movements were fast, frantic, panicked. Then it happened. A sharp misstep, a toe catching against something, his own boot or maybe the edge of a tread. Ross pitched forward. His body hit the stairs with a sickening series of thuds, echoing off the concrete walls like hammer blows. The canteen fell silent. Sarah was out of her seat before the sound stopped echoing. "I'm a nurse," she called out, sprinting toward the stairwell. Private Ross lay crumpled at the bottom, blood already seeping from a jagged cut on his forehead. He groaned and tried to sit up. "Don't move," she commanded, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands went to his neck, gently palpating for fractures, then to his pupils. "Tell me your name." "Private Caleb Ross," he mumbled. "Good. Where are you?" "Camp Buckner, the barracks." Behind her a crowd was gathering. Captain Vale approached, his face unreadable. Detective Moreno and Hans followed close behind. "No major external injuries," Sarah said lowly. "The head wound's superficial, but it's bleeding heavily. Scalp wounds always do." "We should get him to the infirmary," the captain said, tone cool and professional. "I'll take him," Sarah said before anyone could object. Hans stepped forward. "I can help." "No need," she interrupted, already easing Ross into a sitting position. "You've got interviews to prepare." Ross leaned on her as they climbed the stairs slowly. She kept her voice low. "Any dizziness? Nausea? Blurred vision?" "No, ma'am," he whispered. Just clumsy." "That wasn't clumsiness," she said gently. "You were running from something." Ross didn't respond. The infirmary was small but well-equipped. A Navy Corps man with Lance Corporal insignia unlocked the door. Sarah gave him a quick rundown of Ross's condition. Head laceration from a fall, 2-inch gash left temporal, superficial abrasions. alert and oriented. "I can take it from here," the corps man said, already pulling gloves on. But Ross raised his voice. "Actually, Mrs. Dalton's a nurse, an ER nurse. I'd rather she treat me." The corps man blinked in surprise. Fenn grinned. "Ah, I get it. You want the nice older lady nurse instead of my ugly mug? Fair enough." He chuckled and set the supplies on the counter. "I'll be back in a bit." The door closed behind him. The room changed instantly. The tension that had simmered in Ross finally broke. Sarah washed her hands methodically. "You wanted to tell me something?" He nodded, eyes wide, full of pain and shame and desperation. "This morning, in the captain's office, we weren't fixing a drain. What you heard, you were right." Sarah's hands stilled. Ross swallowed. "He was... Yes, and I think he did the same thing to your son." The air drained from the room. The walls tilted. Sarah forced herself to breathe. "Abused you?" she asked softly. Ross nodded, eyes watering. "Please, don't tell anyone. My life could be at stake. I'm new here, been here just over a year. I heard the rumors about Evan, about how the others treated him, how they bullied him, called him names, called him soft." Sarah resumed cleaning the wound, needing the structure of the task to keep herself grounded. "Why did you go to the captain's office? Why let him—" "It wasn't the first time," Ross whispered. "I've been going there for weeks. I was looking for something. Someone told me Evan kept a journal, that the captain took it." Sarah froze. "I figured if I could find it, maybe I'd understand how to survive here, what to do. I'm trying to prove to my dad that I can be a real man." "Did you find it?" Ross hesitated, then reached behind his back and pulled out a small, olive-green notebook, military issue. He handed it to Sarah with trembling fingers. She took it, reverently, as if it might vanish if she blinked. "You found it," she whispered. "I haven't read it yet," Ross said. "I grabbed it this morning while he was distracted." Sarah's hands shook too badly to open the cover. "Read it to me," she said, voice barely audible. "Please." Ross flipped it open. The handwriting hit her like a wave. It was Evan's, as familiar as her own. "September 15th, 1993, Ross read, voice quaking. "They won't leave me alone, Johnson and Martinez especially. They found my letter to Amy, the one I was going to send but chickened out. They say I'm in denial, that writing love letters to girls won't change what I really am." Sarah bowed her head. Her son had bled on these pages. And now, his truth was being read aloud by a stranger, who carried the same wounds. Sarah worked with the mechanical precision of a seasoned ER nurse, tending to Ross's wounds while her thoughts churned into chaos. As Ross read Evan's journal aloud, the words wove a portrait of silent suffering, an emotional battlefield far more brutal than anything she had imagined. Evan had feelings for a female Marine named Amy. He wrote her letters he never sent, perhaps fearing rejection or humiliation. But when his roommates discovered the letters, the taunting intensified. They accused him of hiding from who he truly was, of pretending he wasn't gay. They stripped his words of affection and weaponized them against him. "Is there anything in there about the captain?" Sarah asked, securing the gauze against Ross's scraped arms. Ross flipped toward the final pages, his face paled. "October 3rd, 1993, he read. "The captain called me to his office again. He says he understands me, that he can help. He gave me more of those magazines. I didn't want them, but I looked at them. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am what they say." Sarah felt her chest tighten. Her fingers brushed the journal. Then she tucked it beneath her shirt, pressing it against her heart. "No one else sees this until I give it to Detective Moreno," she whispered. Ross nodded. I wanted to help. I want to testify, but he trailed off. But what? I've been to his office, voluntarily. Looking for the journal. If I say he abused me, they'll say I wanted it, that I went to him willingly. They'll destroy me. Sarah finished bandaging his arms, her voice steady. Then help me another way. Tell me where he goes, where he hides, anything you've heard. Ross's eyes darted to the door. The old gymnasium, he said. It's closed, mostly abandoned, but I heard he goes there, after disciplinary reviews. Someone said he picks up something there. Substances, maybe. Before Sarah could press further, the corpsman returned. Not bad for a civilian, he said, checking her work. You're good to go, Ross, but maybe next time try not to fall down a flight of stairs. He laughed. Ross didn't. As they left the infirmary, Ross leaned towards Sarah. The gymnasium, he whispered. After reviews, that's all I know. They'd barely reached the bottom step when Corporal James appeared. Mrs. Dalton, he said formally, the detective and officer are waiting for you in the main hall. He turned to Ross. Private Ross, there will be consequences for missing training. Report to my office, now. Sarah watched helplessly as Ross was led away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of shame, pain, and something more. Fear. She could feel the journal pressing against her ribs like a secret begging to be spoken. She had evidence now. But of what? Abuse? Neglect? Something darker? The hallway buzzed with movement. Marines set up chairs in precise rows, preparing for the interviews. Detective Marino and Officer Vansberg were deep in conversation near the windows when Sarah approached them, one hand protectively over the journal hidden beneath her clothes. Detective, officer, she said urgently, I need to speak to you, alone. They followed her into a quiet corner partially shielded by a bulletin board cluttered with Marine announcements. Sarah looked around before carefully extracting the journal part way. You to read this. Not here. Somewhere safe. It's Evans. It explains everything about the captain, about what happened to my son. Moreno's eyes sharpened. Where did you get this? Please, Sarah whispered. Read it, but not now. Not here. We're not safe. We're outnumbered. Vansberg leaned closer. Does this lead to an escalated situation? Yes. Sarah said, the word heavier than steel. Marino nodded grimly. He tucked the journal into his jacket and handed her a small flip phone, already programmed with our numbers. If you're in danger, any danger, use it. We'll read it in our room right now, Vansberg added. Go back to yours. Lock the door. I will, Sarah lied. But as she turned and walked away, her course was already set. Outside, morning drills were winding down. Sarah scanned the grounds for Ross, for James, for Vale. Nothing. But she overheard snippets of conversation from passing Marines. Fourth disciplinary review this week, one said. Ross must be going for a record. Gymnasium's getting a real workout, another joked. Sarah's blood chilled. The gymnasium. It's where they said Vale went, it's where Ross said things happened. She spotted the building, a weathered, isolated structure at the far end of the grounds. Its windows were dark, most painted over for privacy. She watched as Captain Vale strode toward it with calculated purpose. He didn't see her. His eyes were fixed on the building. Sarah waited until he disappeared inside. Then she moved. Keeping to the tree line, she crossed the training field, her heart thundering in her chest. A hedge lined the side of the gym, and behind it, she found a cracked window. She peered inside. What she saw made her stomach revolt. Ross stood in the middle of an old basketball court, shirtless. Bruises darkened his skin, some new, others yellow and healing. Corporal James stood in front of him and drove a fist into his gut. Ross doubled over. Captain Vale stood nearby, calm, relaxed, hands folded behind his back as if watching a drill. Ross tried to stand. James punched him again, this time in the face. Blood sprayed. Sarah gasped. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone. She was about to dial when Vale gestured toward a back door. They were taking Ross somewhere deeper. "The ground," she called. "Mrs. Dalton." Moreno answered. "I'm at the gymnasium," she whispered. "They're beating Ross. They're taking him underground. There's a hidden door." "We've read the journal," Moreno said. "FBI and state police are en route. How many people?" "3, including Ross, but there could be more." "Stay there. Do not go in." "That's an order." "I won't." She lied again. Moments later, Moreno and Vansberg arrived, weapons drawn. "I chose you to stay safe," Moreno hissed. "I'm not leaving," Sarah said. "Not again." He sighed but nodded. "Fine. Stay outside. If anything goes wrong, run. Sound the alarm." They disappeared inside. Silence returned. Then, shouts, crashes, the sounds of combat. 4 young Marines appeared around the corner. "What's going on, ma'am?" Before she could answer, another crash echoed from within the gym. "Something's wrong," one said. "Let's check it out." They rushed inside. Sarah followed. The gymnasium was empty, but the back door was ajar. A metal staircase led downward into darkness. At the bottom, a police baton was wedged between the door and the frame, keeping it from locking. Marked, she thought. Beyond lay a concrete tunnel, cold, damp, echoing with forgotten history. Pipes lined the ceiling. The walls were lined with dust and decay. A relic of a darker past. Perhaps a shelter. Or something worse. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be here," one of the young Marines warned, his voice laced with authority. But it was too late. Sarah had already crossed that line long ago, the moment her son disappeared. There was no turning back now. They reached a heavy steel door at the tunnel's end, and it creaked open slowly. The sounds were clearer now, struggling bodies, sharp cries, and something more chilling, a silence that followed pain. The moment they burst through, time seemed to slow. The room was a grim relic of a forgotten era, a Cold War chamber lined with concrete and steel, its walls embedded with rusted prison bars, actual cells, cages, hidden just beneath the surface of American soil. Detective Moreno had Captain Vale pinned against the wall, cuffing him with shaking but steady hands. Officer Vansberg was wrestling Corporal James into submission, his knuckles bloodied from the fight. But it wasn't the violence that held Sarah's gaze. It was what lay behind the bars. Ross sat slumped, one eye swollen shut, blood still dripping from his nose. In the cell beside him, Sarah's breath caught, was Evan, the gaunt shadow of the boy she once knew. His hair was long, his beard patchy, his clothes were filthy rags. He was curled in a fetal position, his back against the cold concrete, his knees to his chest. When he looked up, there was no recognition in his eyes, no light. Only hollow survival. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, stumbling forward, her voice cracking. "Evan?" One of the Marines shouted, "Get them out. We need to get them out." "Check their pockets," Vansberg called. "Keys, now." 2 Marines bolted back down the tunnel. "We'll get tools," one called. "Mrs. Dalton," Vansberg said sternly. "You need to leave. Now." For once, Sarah obeyed. The sight of Evan, alive yet shattered, had pushed her past the breaking point. She stumbled back into the daylight, a new reality crashing down on her. Word spread like fire. Marines poured out of the barracks, some sprinting toward the gymnasium to help, others lingering in stunned, whispering clusters. Near the gate, Sarah spotted a group of Marines in uniform, moving too quickly. They were trying to leave. She turned to Sergeant Lee, who was standing nearby. "Those Marines," she said, "they're trying to escape." Lee didn't hesitate. "Security, lock down the gate." The response was immediate. Trained precision. The would-be fugitives, 6 in total, were detained within minutes. In the distance, sirens howled. Red and blue lights cut across the sky. The cavalry had arrived. FBI agents, state troopers, military police. Sarah met them at the gymnasium, leading them down into the darkness. By the time they reached the chamber, bolt cutters and crowbars had pried open the cells. Vale and James were handcuffed and expressionless. Vale calm to the point of cruelty, James twitching like a rabid animal. Ross was brought out first, supported by 2 Marines. Barely able to walk. Did Evan? He couldn't walk at all. 2 Marines carried him like a wounded child, legs limp, eyes unfocused. In the daylight he looked like a ghost. But he was warm. He was breathing. Sarah dropped to her knees on the pavement. He was alive. 8 years. Her son was alive. She stood shakily as paramedics arrived. Detective Marino appeared at her side, breathless. "We read the journal," he said. "You were right not to trust anyone here. We don't know how deep this goes, but we will find out." The gym became a command post. FBI agents spread across the camp, questioning every Marine. The base was now a crime scene. Sarah felt the journal's weight in her memory. Every page a testimony of survival. "Mrs. Dalton," a paramedic interrupted gently, "we need to get them to the hospital, immediately." Sarah nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She climbed into the ambulance with Evan and Ross. They lay side by side on stretchers. Ross, broken but breathing, turned his head toward her. "You saved us," he whispered, lips cracked. "You saved yourselves," Sarah replied. "By surviving, by not giving up." The ambulance sped toward the regional trauma center. Sarah clutched Evan's hand, feeling how thin and fragile it was. Her son, her strong, gentle, beautiful boy, had endured hell. At the hospital, everything moved fast, too fast. Monitors beeped, IVs flowed. Words flew between doctors and nurses that Sarah understood intellectually, but emotionally, they blurred into white noise. She couldn't be a nurse right now. She was a mother. Time passed strangely in the waiting room. Eventually, a young doctor approached. "Mrs. Dalton? I'm Dr. Chen. Your son and Private Ross are stable. They're being moved now. We've placed them in the same room as requested." "Can I see him?" "Of course. Room 314. He's awake, but very weak. He'll recover physically, but the psychological recovery will take longer." Sarah nodded, knowing what he meant, and what he didn't say. 8 years in captivity. 8 years of silence and fear. Some wounds bleed from the inside. Room 314. Ross was asleep, face wrapped in fresh bandages. IV fluids replaced what had been taken. In the bed beside him, Evan stirred. His head turned slowly, movements like a forgotten skill. "Ivan," she whispered. His eyes found hers. Something flickered. Recognition. Real and raw. His lips parted. Sarah crossed the room and gathered him into her arms. He was so light, so small. But he was real. He was here. They cried. No words. Just the weight of 8 years of nightmares washing away in each other's embrace. "No." Officer Vansberg stood in the doorway. "Sorry to intrude," he said gently. "Detective Moreno is still at the camp. He wanted me to update you." Sarah looked to Evan, who nodded faintly. Vansberg spoke softly. "The captain and corporal aren't talking, but others are, Marines who knew, who were afraid." He paused. "Your son was targeted almost immediately. He didn't fit the mold. Too gentle. Too different. Sarah held Evan's hand tightly. "What happened?" she asked. "They found his letter to a girl. Amy Chen. Thought he was hiding something. Bullied him. Then came the captain. Disciplinary reviews, magazines, manipulation." "But he wasn't gay," Sarah said. "No, but that didn't matter. The rumors, the contraband. They painted a target on his back. Why didn't they kill him?" Vansberg hesitated. "Because they wanted to keep him and Ross, isolated, dependent, abused. It was control." Sarah stared at Evan, whose eyes brimmed with silent pain. "Survived," Vansberg said quietly. "Against every odd, he made it." After he left, Sarah sat on Evan's bed, stroking his hair gently. "It may look like this," Evan whispered, "but I'm still strong inside." Rushed tears. Sarah asked, "How did you stay strong?" "I waited," he said. "I knew you'd come." "Never," Sarah said fiercely, "never gave up." He glanced toward Ross. "Is he?" "His name is Caleb. He's the one who found your journal. The one who helped." Evan's eyes fluttered shut, a faint peace on his face. Sarah stayed seated, watching over the two boys. Two survivors. Two testaments to resilience. In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by machines and healing, Sarah realized a truth far deeper than pain. Evil thrives in shadows. But love waits. It endures. It searches. And when it finds what was lost, it brings them home.